This terrifying true tale took place 20 years ago in West Virginia. I have a dear Uncle Mike who, having just had his wife pass away, needed a change. At that time, he felt the best thing for him to do was to have a fresh start, so opted to move in with his bachelor brother, my Uncle Drew. Uncle Drew lived in a single-wide trailer isolated deep in the countryside of West Virginia. Now, if you didn't know exactly where to go, you would have never found it, and that's just the way he liked it. My uncles both led a quiet life. They had no large social circles and much preferred to be left alone. Just them, God, and the West Virginia backcountry. The brothers would spend their days working the land, some days teaming up on projects while others going their separate ways. Now, things between the two of them and the new living arrangement seemed to be working out very well, and time ticked on as it has a way of doing. Now, after a little while, odd things around the property began to take place, and honestly, at the start, it began happening so slow and infrequent that no one even seemed to give it a second's thought, until one afternoon, Uncle Mike made his way back to the house in search of a particular tool that he needed, only to find that it wasn't there where it was supposed to be. As a matter of fact, after looking around, well, it was nowhere at all. Perplexed, Uncle Mike made do with the substitution and went about his way. A couple of days later, it was Uncle Drew's turn to have to deal with a mystery. He went to collect some jugs that he kept stored for water, only to discover that they weren't there. Now, busy at the time and unsure where Mike was, Drew figured he would question his brother later about the missing jugs. Once the two brothers finished their hard day's labor and joined each other back at the house, Drew questioned Mike about the water jugs. Well, Mike had no idea what he was talking about. However, the question triggered his own memory, so he, in turn, questioned Drew about the missing tools. Both brothers sat there scratching their heads, wondering what in the world was going on, as neither had any idea about the missing items. The next day, the brothers were a little apprehensive leaving the house as they couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was going on. But a few missing jugs and tools certainly weren't going to stop the chores needing done. Now, this particular day went by without incident, and feeling rather accomplished with a good day's work, Mike and Drew reconvened at home to get some supper. But it was then they discovered that items were missing from the kitchen. Several sodas and a loaf of bread had mysteriously vanished since that morning. Each brother looked at the other with a suspicious eye, but knew rightly they weren't lying when they claimed no knowledge of the missing items. But if it wasn't them, then who or what was it? Now, coming to the realization that something out of their control was taking place, the brothers became hypervigilant of their surroundings. They did their best to keep an eye on the house while keeping up with all of their day-to-day tasks. Time ticked on for a couple more days with no real incidences to report until one evening, Drew came home to discover the front door was ajar. So at first, thinking Mike had already arrived, he thought nothing more of it. But once he entered the house and discovered that Mike in fact was not home, Drew immediately realized that there was a very serious problem. As soon as his brother arrived, Drew explained the situation and how he found the door open. Now, neither brother claimed responsibility and were both adamant they had closed the door when they left that morning. So that evening, before retiring to bed, Drew was searching for something in the top drawer of his dresser when he discovered another item was missing. But this was no simple, ordinary item. Oh, no. This was his wedding band. Drew had placed the wedding band in the back of his drawer out of the way so it wouldn't be a constant reminder of his deceased wife. And now it was missing. And that was the final straw. Mike and Drew knew they had to figure out what was going on and figure it out fast. They also knew that being as far out in the boonies as they were, that they would receive little to no help from local sheriff's department, so intended to take matters into their own hands. Now, by this point, the brothers had a pretty good idea of what was going on, but they just had to get proof. So the next day, they started their own sting operation. They left the house as normal as not to raise any alarm. When they arrived home that evening, the two brothers acted as if it were any other ordinary evening, except it wasn't. Shortly before dark, Mike went through his nightly routine of getting ready for bed. However, Drew slipped off to the shed, where he set up his stakeout. It didn't take too awful long either. Drew had really just settled in for what he figured would be a long night when movement in the dark caught his eye. Tightening his grip on his gun and leaning forward for a better look, it was unmistakable. A piece of the trailer's underpinning was moving. Not wanting to shoot his bolt and act too early, Drew laid back in the darkness for a few more moments. Then, sure enough, the underpinning was tossed out of the way by an unseen source. However, it was only a matter of seconds before the mystery would be solved. Drew's mouth fell agape as he watched a strange man crawl out from under the trailer. Suddenly, everything became crystal clear, and all of the events of the previous weeks made perfect sense. Springing into action, he charged at the strange man, and pulling his weapon, he took aim. Then shouting on Mike to phone 911, the brothers then waited for the authorities to arrive. Once the law finally made it out to the secluded location, They arrested the intruder before then having a look under the house, and what they found was a little more than disturbing. Under the house was a menagerie of survival items, such as sleeping bags, ropes, flashlights, jugs of water, and a loaded gun. Once the intruder was taken for questioning, he admitted he had been living under the house for almost 2 months. He told officers how he would lay under the house and listen to the floorboards, determining when the 2 men would leave for the day, go to bed, and so on. Once he knew the house was empty, that's when he would sneak out and have a poke around to see if he could find anything of use. Now, only in the last couple of weeks leading up to his capture did he become desperate from starvation and break into the house seeking food. And after further questioning, he ultimately confessed to authorities that he very much had ill intentions. Thankfully, the brothers discovered their unwelcome guest before it was too late. Story number 2. It was 1995. When I was 20 years old, I moved to Washington to be close to my brother and his family. I found an affordable top-floor apartment and settled in. Despite being on the top floor, occasionally I thought I heard footsteps above me. But over the months, I did start to notice things going missing. I would buy a 6-pack of soda, drink 1, come home from work, and find only 4 left. And it was the same with the packets of soup and ramen noodles. I also noticed that doors I had left open were closed, or vice versa. Mostly, I found it amusing because at first I assumed that it was my brother who had a key and was coming over and eating my food. But after a few lonely months and seeking some companionship, I got a puppy. While she was being toilet trained, I kept her in the bathroom when I went out. One day when I was out running errands, the apartment had a plumbing leak and flooded. Upon discovering this, I was shocked by the amount of water, but not nearly as shocked as I was to find the puppy in the sink. Now, she was tiny, and I didn't know how she could have got up there unless someone had put her there to save her from possible drowning. So time ticked on, and I continued to hear footsteps. There was a hatch in the ceiling leading to what I assumed was an attic, and this piqued my curiosity. So I asked my landlady if there was any way at all someone could be up there. Well, she said there was absolutely no way that it was possible, and told me that I was probably hearing squirrels or a raccoon. So with nothing further to be done at the time, I pushed it out of my mind. Until one day, I called in sick from work. Now, feeling terrible, I laid on the couch all day until finally it was 11 p.m. Thinking a hot bath might help me feel better, I turned off the lights, lit a candle, and ran a bath. As I lay in the water feeling absolutely miserable, I glanced up at the ceiling and noticed the attic hatch was open, the hatch that I hadn't touched. Just then, time slowed to near stopping, and what took 30 seconds in reality felt like 5 minutes. As I stepped out of the bathtub, all of the puzzle pieces fell into place. The footsteps, the food, the puppy, someone was in my apartment. My first thought was, if they had wanted me dead, well, I would be dead by now, because they've had access to me for 6 months, yet tried nothing. Now, I assumed it must be a man, or at least someone tall enough to get up there without a ladder. And I knew I had to play it cool and stay calm as not to scare him in case he panicked and hurt me. I walked as calmly as possible to the bedroom to get my robe, along the way, passing the mirrored closet that I suspected he was hiding in. Then when I went to the kitchen, I got a hammer out of the drawer for protection and called my sister-in-law. I whispered, "I think there's someone in my house." She told me to leave the apartment immediately and that she was on her way. 3 minutes later, she was outside. We went back to her house and called the cops. Now, they didn't find anybody, but there was a nest full of stuff in the attic. A sleeping bag, some food, and a book. Next day, I told my landlady I was moving out and gave her a copy of the police report, which noted signs of a possible intruder. For years, the experience has haunted me. When I was home alone, I would always feel as if I was being watched. I lived somewhere else with an attic hatch and asked the landlord to put a lock on the outside for me. I now live in Illinois, in a house that doesn't have an attic, thankfully. I live here with my husband, 2 children, a dog, and 2 birds. Now, sadly, I no longer have the puppy from Washington, but I often think that she was the only one who ever saw what was really going on. The stranger was never caught. The police had no idea what the intruder was doing there, as it was a quiet town with no visibly homeless people. I do have a strange sympathy for the intruder somehow, as there was no malice. And honestly, he was the best roommate I ever had. He kept to himself, was quiet, and always put the toilet seat down. I can never be certain, but I think I saw him once. One afternoon, I was coming out of my apartment to go to the grocery store, and there was a guy in his mid-30s with reddish hair just sitting on the curb as if he was waiting for something. He looked at me for longer than is socially acceptable, and I thought it was weird. And then when I came back from the grocery store, well, he was gone. I thought nothing of it then, but now I wonder, just maybe that stranger knew all of my darkest secrets.